Hello. I'm Avdi, and I wanted to talk a little bit about my experiences with pair programming. And this talk is going to have a lot of hand raising in it, kind of like a charismatic church service. So let's start off with a simple question. Have you ever, actually, you know what, I'm going to start with a even earlier question. Who here has done any pair programming? All right, fair amount. Who hasn't done any pair programming? Not too many. So pretty good number of people have been exposed to it. So you don't need to hear this talk. I'm going to keep talking anyway. Maybe I'll find something to talk about. So have you ever been in this position? Have you been new to Ruby or Rails and felt a little bit lost? Have you ever felt like, maybe you've read some books, you've watched some screencasts, you have a lot of facts, but what you lack is context. You ever felt this way? Have you ever been a sole developer? Maybe you're the only person working on a project, or a remote developer, Have you ever been a remote developer? Maybe the rest of the team is in one place and you're off in your own place, and felt a little bit isolated. Another question. Have you ever used a new library or technique and, maybe it was a good library, it was a good technique, but you realized, part of the way in that you did it all wrong? All right, here's a tough one. Have you ever felt like other developers are just a little bit crazy? Have you ever been in a position where you're staring at your screen going, "What were you thinking?" Have you ever, and also have you ever just sort of gotten kind of cynical about the industry that you're in as a result of these moments? Yeah, be honest. We've been there. I've been there. Have you ever wanted to do more for the community, but maybe you don't feel inspired to blog, you don't feel like you have a lot of time to do, put hours and hours into open source software? Ever felt like this? So if you raise your hand to any of those questions, I have a suggestion for you. Pair programming. I already asked you how many people have pair programmed. How many people pair program regularly, like once a week or more? A fair number of people. Pretty cool. Now, when I say pair programming, I actually specifically I mean I'm getting lost in my slides. So, okay, obviously most of you have already paired. You've been there, you've done that, you've got that t-shirt. So what am I up here talking about? What I want to talk to you about, and I want to encourage you to do today, is to pair more widely and to pair more often. And typically this means pairing remotely in order to find more people to pair with. I want to encourage you in this talk to pair outside of your office, outside of maybe your geographic boundaries. And for the rest of this talk, I want to explain a little bit about how to do that, and a little bit more about why to do that. I don't really want to convince you. Obviously, you've mostly done pair programming. I'm not here to convince you why pair programming is a good idea, but just to quickly review some of the reasons that pair programming is awesome. First of all, it's instant code review. There's this great blog post by Steve Jackson about how he learned to love pair programming, and at one point he says this. He says, "I was still on the fence until we had a couple of weeks at work where only one of us was there, and I lost 2.5 hours to a typo." You ever had that happen? I've had that happen way too many times. It's a sanity check. Sandy Metz has this great quote. She was talking about rules and guidelines for coding. And she says, sure, break a rule, but do it if you can convince your pairing partner that breaking the rule would produce better code. Of course, if you don't have a pairing partner, you don't have anybody to convince. Pairing partners are great for moral support. Sometimes you're tired. Sometimes you hate the code that you're working on. It happens. On days like that, having a pairing partner can really lift your spirits. Having somebody to work with and talk to can really help. You've probably heard the term rubber duck programming, where you keep explaining your problem to a rubber duck that you keep on your desk until you eventually find yourself explaining the solution. It works, but I find that explaining it to an actual human being works more often. So pair programming is great for that. It's great for staying focused. Nobody wants to pair Twitter. So, it can be a little harder. It gives you a little less, or a little impetus not to switch over to that Twitter window. Question?
Doesn't that guy die in
Yes, but he was encouraging others to stay on target right up until that moment. That's a good pair. That if you will sacrifice yourself to keep your pair on target, be a Porkins pair programmer. How many of you knew that guy's name? How much of a nerd am I? Oh God. And pair programming, it can give you a fresh perspective on the problems that you're looking at. Sometimes you can stare at a problem for a long time and not realize that there's an obvious solution. So, around the middle of last year, I tried an experiment. I stopped doing traditional software consulting, which I'd been doing for a while. And I switched over entirely to doing something I called being a consulting pair programmer, which meant that people would make appointments with me for pairing sessions. People from all around the world would make these appointments with me, and I would pair with them on some project. And that was what I did. I was not doing any kind of project-based consulting. In the process, up till this point, I've had well over 60 pairing partners, spent well over 250 hours on pairing with different people. I think there are a few people that I've paired with in this room. Raise your hand if I have. Yeah, a few people. Cool. It's always great to meet people that I've paired with remotely in person. These were mostly paid sessions. I was making a living this way, but I also tried to make time once a week to do a free open source pairing session, and those were a lot of fun. Got to meet some interesting folks that way. So, like I said, this was my job. This is what I did, and it still would be if you folks wouldn't keep buying Ruby Tapas subscriptions. Not that I'm complaining. So people came to me for these sessions for a few different reasons. There were like sort of a few broad categories that they fell under. Some of them, a fair amount of them, were just newbies, either to Ruby or to Rails, and they wanted some tutoring. So we would work through some basics. Some people would come to me, they were working on a project, but they had a particular problem that they wanted to work through, or maybe they wanted me to take a look at their solution and see if we could refactor it a little, make it a little nicer. But interestingly to me, the most common request of all was basically, help me grok TDD. And so some of the requests that I would get would kind of sound like this. They'd say something like, I'm teaching myself, and the tutorials don't really show me how to do it, how to TDD a project from scratch. Or I'm on a team that doesn't do TDD, so I've never really experienced it. or everyone says TDD is a good idea, but I just don't see how to write the tests before the code. And this is kind of interesting to me. I feel like having observed, having worked with a whole lot of different people, we talk about testing, we talk about TDD a lot in the Ruby community, like Sandy was saying. But there's still, I think, this kind of testing gap. There are a huge number of developers that just aren't testing or aren't doing test-driven development, and they're working at companies where it's just not part of the culture, or they're working alone and never really had a chance to get into it. And a lot of them are really kind of embarrassed to admit that, and I think that's kind of a shame, because I think we've all gone through that. I think the truth is, TDD, actually driving your code with tests, there's a hump, there's a gap that you have to get over. And it's that gap between looking at a problem and seeing the code that you need to write to solve the problem, and looking at a problem and seeing the test that you need to write in order to verify that the problem is solved. And I had to get over that hump. We all had to, any of us who do TDD regularly had to get over that hump. And I don't have time to talk about some of the specific strategies that I used to help people through that, but I will say I think it's incredibly valuable if you're in that position to pair with someone who has gotten over the hump, who has that TDD experience, and can sort of lead you along through in that red-green refactor cycle. Just in case any of you want to try something like my experiment, I want to talk just quickly about some of the mechanics of the sessions that I did. I am not an expert on remote pair programming by any means. I don't know that anybody is at this point. It's kind of an early discipline, and these are just some things that worked for me. They're definitely not the way to do it. So all of my sessions were 2 hours long. I found that 2 hours was a good length in order to work out any connection issues that we had at the beginning, get oriented to a new code base, and still accomplish a solid piece of work, but not so long that we would get burnt out. You got to be careful with that with pair programming. Pair programming is a really high energy activity, or at least it should be. And so it is easy to get burnt out if you spend too long in one session. They were all scheduled in advance. I found doing many of these a week that it was absolutely essential to have an assistant to help me schedule these things. I've tried all of the scheduling as a service programs, and they all suck in their own special ways. There's nothing, for something like that, nothing beats the human touch as far as I'm concerned. I tried very hard to get everyone to bring their own project to me. So it might have been a project that they were already working on. It might just be a product idea that they had in mind, but I really wanted to get people to bring their own project to me, whether it was a work project or a personal project. Just something that they cared about, that they were invested in. And the reason I tried so hard to get them to bring me their own project is something that I learned when I was a teenager, when I was trying to, I was trying to learn to play the guitar. I discovered that it was much easier to keep working on songs that I cared about and that I liked than it was on some, exercise song in an exercise book. I also discovered that it's easier to learn to play the guitar when your favorite band only knows 4 chords. This is a somewhat dated picture of my desk setup. I have since acquired an actual monitor. That was pretty exciting for me. This is basically the setup. I wanted to point out a couple of things in my hardware setup that made things easier. First of all, if you do a lot of remote pair programming, a nice headset is a pretty good thing to have. Just any kind of headset or headphones will cut down on echoes and feedback. But if you're somebody like me who kind of has to pace around, when I have to pace around when I think, having a wireless headset is really nice.
Do you have a recommendation specifically?
Do I have a recommendation for headset? The one I'm using right now is a Corsair Vengeance 2000. It's a gaming headset. Gaming companies are the only ones that make headsets that are intended to be worn for 8-hour sessions. And it's the best one I've used, but it's still not perfect. It's too tight on my giant head, but it's pretty decent. So the other thing I wanted to draw some attention to, I have my tablet mounted up on a mount off to the right of my monitor. And what I would usually do is I would have the video chat with my pairing partner, either Skype or Gtalk or Google Hangout. I would have that to the right on my tablet, and then I'd be doing the screen share on my main display. And I really like the dynamic that this gives me because it enables me to look at the work and then look over at them when they're talking to me and then look back at the work. And I find that this is a much more natural, much more human kind of dynamic than the usual thing when you're both using all one screen and you're sort of unnaturally staring at each other the entire time. It's like, are you looking at me or are you looking at the code? I don't know. But it's making me nervous. So, yeah, I recommend, excuse me. See, you're all looking at me, it's making me nervous. You can just put your laptop off to the side and have your main monitor in the center. But something like that helps out a lot. I use a hosted screen sharing service called Yugu for my screen sharing. I did this because I was optimizing for the fact that I was pairing with many different people a week, and I had to be compatible with people in different operating systems, and I had to get set up really quickly. Well, at least that was one of the reasons. But there is a ton of interesting software in this space. We've heard a lot about tmux in the last today and yesterday, and a lot of other interesting things. I'm not going to make you really quickly jot these things down. Instead, I'm planning on making some resources available, which I'll talk about a little later for finding out about tools and other things for remote pair programming. So people have asked me how I managed to quickly get oriented, into a brand new project in the space of 2 hours, and then actually be able to contribute something in that same 2 hours. I have heard it suggested when getting into a new project to read tests. I haven't found this very useful myself. If the tests even exist, they often don't reflect the structure of the project. So what I would usually do is I would have my pairing partner bring up the application, just to actually start it up, and over the screen share, show me what it did, and particularly show me the feature that we would be working on that day. And once I'd seen that, I found it was usually pretty easy, especially for a Rails app, it was usually pretty easy to then drop down to the view level and then the controller level, sort of go from the outside in, and then I could understand more or less what was going on in most cases pretty quickly. I did take a lot of notes while I was doing this. I would take notes for each session, and one reason was I would send these notes out to my pairing partners at the end of the sessions, and one reason was that it enabled me to give them any URLs and books that I had mentioned during the session, so they could go look those up. But I think an even bigger advantage was just that it gave me something to refer back to when if I worked with them again, the next week or the next month. I mostly did sort of classic navigator driver pair programming in my sessions, and I would have them be the driver. They would be at the keyboard, they would be sharing their screen, and I would be looking over their shoulder and mostly talking, not doing a lot of typing. I did this for a few reasons. It was partly because I was using screen sharing. Screen sharing is mostly tends to be still too laggy to make typing remotely very effective, so it's hard to hand the keyboard back and forth. Partly I did it because I wanted them to be able to just use the environment that they were comfortable with, rather than trying to fill up some of that 2 hours with, showing them how to use Emacs or something like that. And but the biggest reason was really I wanted to leave them in a position at the end of a session where they could just keep going, just keep going right from where they left off. What I really wanted to avoid is that situation where we have a really productive session, I show them a lot of neat stuff, and then it ends and they're thinking, now wait a minute, how did he do that? So I really didn't want them to be just audience. You know, I wanted them to be participating, and I think it's really important if you're doing pairing and one of you has a lot to learn, I think that person ought to be at the keyboard. They ought to be doing the typing, because then it's going through them. If they have questions about why you're doing what you're doing, they're actually more likely to speak up. Okay, so I just got done telling you about how I did a bunch of pairing, but why should any of you care about any of this stuff? Well, the reason I think you should care is because I think that you should do it too. Let's talk about some of those cases we talked about earlier. If you are a newbie at Ruby or Rails or any other technology, pair programming with somebody who's more experienced than you is a fantastic way to get that context. You have all those facts, you have all that knowledge, but you need that context, and you need to see someone, using the knowledge, fitting the different pieces into place. And pairing is just fantastic. It's the best way I know to get that context. If you're feeling isolated, pair programming can give you validation for your design decisions. It can flag things you've missed because of that tunnel vision that sets in after weeks or months of programming alone. But more than either of those things, if you're isolated, pair programming can re-energize you. It can give you this boost, when you're bouncing ideas back and forth between you and a pairing partner, that boost can last for days, for a week afterwards. It's really great. And if you're working with some kind of new technology, like I said, you could spend a couple of weeks working through blog posts and trying to get it right, and then the next few months wondering if you used it all wrong. Or you could ask somebody who's already an expert in that technology for a couple hours of their time, say, can you get me up to speed on this? Can you maybe apply it to my project? Show me how it would be used in my project, or alternately tell me that it shouldn't be used in my project. And they can show you the ropes. They can steer you away from any pitfalls that they fell into when they first used it. And I think this is a really effective way to very quickly level up on new technologies. Like, for example, I don't know anything about Ember.js, but I do know that Noel Rappin wrote a book about it. So if I was in a project where I realized I wanted to use Ember.js, I would probably just send Noel an email and say, can I please buy 2 hours of your time, and you can get me up to speed on this? I mean, yeah, I could watch screencasts, but none of them are going to give me the context of actually working through it with somebody who knows it. And if you're feeling cynical about the programming profession, about other programmers, about yourself maybe, pairing can make you feel better about yourself because you helped someone. And that's the first step to feeling better about other people and getting out of that sort of depressive, cynical hole. It can also remind you, working with somebody else can really remind you that other programmers are humans too. And they're just humans working, just like you, working with the tools at hand, with the knowledge that they have, trying to get to the best solution possible. So the next time that someone is wrong on the internet, what if you asked them to pair with you? What if you asked them to pair with you? And this is what this talk is. That's what this talk is really about. It's about building up the pairing ecosystem. We all know that ecosystems are healthier when they have great genetic diversity. I believe that communities are healthier when they have great memetic diversity, a diversity of ideas. And when we share ideas and approaches to problems, it keeps us from getting stuck in mental ruts. It can help keep us energized, and it can help keep us improving at our craft. So I want to encourage you to pair widely, to pair more often, pair beyond your organization, beyond your company, pair beyond maybe your geographic boundaries. I believe, based on my experiences, that the technology for this it's really a solved problem. The tools exist, they keep getting better and better. There are hiccups here and there, but it works. You can do it today. The real question is, how do I find somebody to pair with? And I don't think that that's really a technological question, a technological problem at all. Here's a question for you. Who would you want to pair with? Think about this for a second. Just think about, there's probably somebody out there in the Ruby community, maybe somebody in this room, that you would love to spend a couple hours programming with. All right, I'm not going to ask you who. Just think about that for a second. Now, I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong about this. But I'll bet that there's a good chance that if you asked them nicely, they would say yes. Which brings me to my next question. If somebody came to you, if somebody wrote you an email and said, hey, I really like your work on Project X, or I really like that discussion we had at Ancient City Ruby, do you think we could pair for a couple hours sometime? If somebody came to you and asked you that, would you say yes? So I thought. A lot of people, I think, would say yes to that. So I have a challenge for you. I have a challenge for you. If you said yes to that, if you were willing there, do you think you could pair with someone new once a month? Just once a month. Do you think you could do that? Think you have time for that, 2 hours in a month? And if you're willing, I want to encourage you further to put out a welcome mat for that. And to kind of help you do this, I put up a tiny little website, pairprogramwith.me. You can go there, you can get this snazzy badge, which was designed by David Browning, and put this on your blog or on your project website. You know, it's kind of like that Fork Me on GitHub thing, only this is Pair With Me. And link it to some way to contact you. I kind of like Wufoo for building little simple contact forms. You can just make it a mail to link, I don't care. But link it to some way to contact you. And you know, what this says is it's a way to let the world know that it's okay to ask. Because I think that's really, it's not a technical thing. It's really, you know, the barrier is, you know, is just, I think sometimes we're afraid to ask. Another thing you can do, let the world know through Twitter. Tweet with the Pair With Me hashtag. I'm going to be keeping my eye out for this. And I'll retweet it if I see it. So let the world know that way. Also, you know, speaking of Twitter, I tweet, I check in whenever I visit somewhere new on Foursquare. I check in on another service whenever I drink a new beer. What if we checked in with our pairing programmers, or pairing partners? Maybe tag that with pairing with. I'm thinking that maybe with a little help I can put up an aggregator for this, and we can start spreading awareness that this is a thing, that we are trying to pair more with, you know, people outside of our immediate circles and build our memetic diversity. So I believe that we can make our community healthier and happier. We can build our memetic diversity, our diversity of ideas, by pairing more widely and more often. Happy hacking, everyone.